Welcome to the Filmlings podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 36, Body Count Coen.
And today we have a guest with us, Benjamin Angrisano.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, pretty good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Been mixed up in any murder mysteries lately, Ben?
Not for the most part, not in real life, but I've been watching a couple movies about murder mysteries lately.
Yeah,
well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you on to talk about these movies. We know that you are a huge fan of the Coen Brothers, and some of these movies specifically.
Mm-hmm. Some of these movies I watched with you for the first time, or you watched with me for the first time.
Yeah, I think you showed me Fargo and No Country for Old Men both for the first time.
Oh, wow, okay.
So,
wow.
And Blood Simple was pretty new for all of us. I think Alex had seen it a couple weeks ago, but other than that,
had not seen it.
Yeah, it's been a very Coen-tastic couple weeks for me. I've watched and rewatched several of their films, and we hope to introduce a lot of their work to you guys today, because it's definitely worth exploring, and it's very fun to watch, very fun to study. But who are the Coen brothers? Well, one is named Joel, and one is named Ethan. And they are, in fact, actually brothers. That's not like a gimmick or anything. They are blood brothers. Joel is the older of the two. You can recognize him in photos because he always has his arm crossed. And Ethan is the younger of the two, and he typically has at least one hand in his pocket. I don't know. Those are just weird observations I made this week. Take them or leave them. Disprove them if you want to. Feel free to send me photographic evidence on Twitter. Disproving that or confirming it, have fun. But the Coen brothers were born and raised outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. As we will see, that has a big influence on some of their filmmaking when we get to Fargo. Joel went to the NYU Film School, and he eventually worked with filmmaker Sam Raimi on The Evil Dead as an assistant editor, and that was kind of his foot in the door to the whole film industry in general. And he and his brother eventually made Blood Simple together. They wrote and directed it in 1984. They achieved critical success for the first time with Barton Fink in 1991, and they had a big critical and commercial hit with Fargo in 1996, which was really important because they were coming off of that time, the flop of the Hudsucker Proxy, which now has gained some respect and gained some a bit of a cult following, like many of their movies have. But Fargo was a very big deal and is definitely considered one of the best movies of all time by now. And this is interesting. Both of them have directed all of the films they've ever made, but before 2003, Joel was always credited as the director and Ethan as the producer. And that has a lot to do with guild rules, the DGA, and whatever the Producers Guild is called. Only established duos, whatever that means, can be credited as co-directors on films. And that has a lot to do with not wanting to water down the position of director. Since it's risen to new heights coming off of the fame of the French auteur theory that we have talked about so much on this podcast. They also both edit all of their films underneath the pseudonym Roderick Janes. That's who they're credited as in the credits, but they both edit all of their films. And some of their very important collaborators include Roger Deakins, Frances McDormand, who's in almost all of the films and is married to Joel Coen. And of course, they have a very large cult of actors that follow them from movie to movie, including the likes of John Goodman, Steve Buscemi, George Clooney, and so on and so forth. But you see a lot of the same faces across all of their films. But what films are we talking about in particular today, Jonathan?
So we're starting off with their first film, as we often do when we cover a director. I guess this is the first time we've done a directing duo before. They're not
established duo.
Yeah, there are not too many of them out there, but these are definitely one of the more famous ones. So this is their first film, and we're going to see how it relates to this kind of theme, this crime noirish theme that has followed them throughout their work, sometimes. And there is a period after simple. That's very important.
That is important. And the second film we are talking about today is Fargo from 1996. You may know it as a TV series these days, but it was a movie first. It won awards at the Oscars for the Best Actress and Best Screenplay categories, and was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor, Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Editing. So that was definitely their breakout film.
And what's the last film, Ben?
The last film is one of my favorite movies. It's called No Country for Old Men. And it won Best Picture in 2007, along with a bunch of other things. That was actually, sidebar, that was a very interesting year at the Academy Awards because it pitted No Country for Old Men against what many have claimed now to be the best movie of the 21st century so far, There Will Be Blood. And a lot of people confuse those two a lot. But basically all the things that No Country for Old Men was nominated for but didn't win, There Will Be Blood won, and all the things that No Country for Old Men won, There Will Be Blood was nominated for. So
that's interesting.
That was really just kind of a toss-up. They just sort of like shared all the different awards. But getting back to No Country for Old Men in terms of the Coens, you see a lot of what's interesting about it is that it's actually an adaptation, unlike Fargo and Blood Simple, which were original screenplays that they had come up with. No Country for Old Men was a book by Cormac McCarthy that they adopted and put their style into, and really just brought it to life in a way that created something timeless, and that is for me, along with Fargo, endlessly rewatchable. I can just watch these movies over and over again and pick up on new things and never get tired of them. So yeah, I'm really excited to delve into those today.
All right, well, let's get into it. So, Blood Simple, period. Again, that's important. Blood Simple is a kind of convoluted mess that starts with a woman and a man in a car, and we understand that the woman is cheating on her husband with this guy who works for her husband. And so...
Well, had that happened yet?
Well, we see it developing. So they're talking about it, and then they go to a hotel room, and that's where the infidelity occurs. And so eventually the husband who owns this bar, he finds out about it because this private detective comes to him with photos of what happened because he was having her followed. He didn't trust her. So eventually the fact that this cheating is actually happening starts gnawing at the barkeeper, whose name is Marty. So he ends up hiring the private detective to kill his wife and her new lover, which the private detective claims to do. And then there is, double crossing involved and just all of these misunderstandings, and which lead to quite criminal actions. And I don't want to give too much away about the end because there are so many plot twists in this movie that it's really just an exciting experience to go into fresh.
It's more shocking than kicking a loaded gun across the floor.
Yes.
Indeed.
If you will.
Not that happens. Like, I'm not spoiling anything. It's possible.
Just hypothetically.
Hypothetically, that would be very surprising.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, but this is like the first time that we're seeing this kind of technique or thematic interest that the Coens seem to have carried throughout their career, as far as very twist and turny plots, and very much interested in kind of the ways that crimes happen, where even if a crime was planned, something happens that makes something else that was not actually planned happen, which may be more or less criminal than what was originally planned. And I know that's all very confusing, but these movies do kind of get there at some points, and you're like, why is this person doing this? and then it all gets cleared up and or killed at the end.
Yeah, it gets cleared up for us as an audience because we're viewing it from that omnipotent viewing point. But for a lot of the characters, it doesn't. And maybe one of my favorite parts about Blood Simple is that by the end, and again, this isn't really giving anything away, none of the characters entirely know what happened.
Oh, yeah.
All the characters are kind of left confused. Like they think they know what happened, or maybe they don't, because they are really left with the mud still in their eyes.
Well, yeah, in this one specifically, the character who ends up being the protagonist, who you wouldn't really suspect to be until like the last scene, but that character doesn't know at all what happened or how they got put into the situation that we end the movie on. They don't know anything, and so it's interesting because only the audience understands what has just happened.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that all three of these movies, I will say, do have in common, if I can talk about that yet.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Is character types. And
right.
in these movies, especially in the latter two that we haven't gotten to yet, but you'll have like a character that's like the moral center. You'll have a character that acts as the opposing factor, that like the evil, if you will, and then generally you're going to have another character that's also that's motivated by just very selfish intent, but is much more sympathetic, much more relatable. Your Jerry Lundegaards, your what's his name, Josh Brolin.
Oh, right.
In No Country for Old Men.
Okay.
Yeah, so like that guy that you're following that is motivated by selfish intent, but like you're kind of the everyman, if you will, that just gets caught up.
Yeah. So
in
Ray,
everything that's going on. Yeah. So Ray, I guess.
Ray being the lover in this story.
Yes. So again, motivated by something selfish, but also like you understand his point of view and you kind of relate with it. To an extent, Marty, I suppose too. But
yeah, I would say that also.
I think that's really cool that and then another important.
And then you also
kind
of have the wild card.
Yes, another important character in all three of those is typically the spouse of the good character, and oftentimes also the spouse of the selfish character or the regular character, and they end up typically playing a pretty large and sometimes just subliminal part. But you've got Sheriff Ed Tom Bell's wife, and you have Marge's husband, but then you also have, and these people usually play a bigger role, and usually things don't end up as well for them, but the selfish character's wife usually gets wrapped up in everything as well, usually not to their advantage. But
but that's interesting because this film is a little different in that the kind of moral center, the spouse of that character is the one almost instigating the whole thing just by this one decision.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a little twist on that.
Right. And this is the proto version of that. This is the first instance of, this is the first Coen Brothers film, so it's the first instance of them doing anything in any of their movies, really. But this is the first incarnation of those characters that, like you pointed out, will be carried forward into each of their other films. And you're right. I do like how they kind of repeat in almost like this. Oh gosh, what's the help me out, guys? What is the thing where characters have defined roles? Is that the rules of like Italian drama or
like archetypes?
Archetypes, that's it. Thanks, Jonathan. That's the reason we have multiple people on this podcast.
Yeah.
It's the thing where characters have archetypes. Yeah. So it's almost like the Coens have developed their own set of archetypes for characters that they like to write, which makes sense. And you keep coming back to see how it turns out for them over and over again in each of these films. And I like that they're all flawed characters to some extent. Like they all feel very real. and very relatable in all of the films. Even though stuff gets really crazy, it feels like a normal person in a crazy situation, and how they react feels very similar to the panic that you or I would feel in that situation.
I feel like Blood Simple is definitely the tightest of all three of these films. It's the one that is stripped away of things you don't need the most, like every scene, every shot, everything that happens.
It is. It's
just so tight. It's so good. Everything is so intentional and driving the plot forward, everything that happens. And the characters, this could honestly act as like a play, a 5-character play.
Yeah.
It is super conservative in terms of what it uses, and a lot of that is for budgetary reasons. I mean, this, two young filmmakers in 1984 or anytime really aren't going to have a lot of money to make their first film.
And we've seen that with lots of directors' first films, like Following from Christopher Nolan. It's just you use only what you must use to get your story told, and often that ends up making a much more pure and, in this case, a much more actually suspenseful and thrilling film.
Yeah, it's actually, and I don't know the exact order of cause and effect that it happened. But go and watch this video that Jonathan found this week, where the Coens and Frances McDormand talk about storyboarding, and storyboarding Blood Simple as kind of like the focal point of this video. And they talk about one of the big advantages of doing this intense planning with their storyboards. It saves money. Like, if you know exactly what you're going to build, exactly what you're going to show, then you only have to do that. If you're only going to shoot these 2 walls of the set, then you only need to build those 2 walls of the set.
Right. You avoid what's called dump truck shooting. I think that's actually a Roger Deakins term, who didn't shoot this film but shot the other 2 films, where basically you just shoot as many angles and things as possible, and then you decide what you need later on when you're editing and cut everything else out. But if you plan it all out, then you just have exactly what you need for the edit. And things can still be arranged and cut, but you don't have so much extra time spent filming things that you don't need.
Yeah, I definitely agree that... so Pablo Picasso said that art is the elimination of the unnecessary. And I feel like in Blood Simple especially, you're seeing that all that's on the board, all that's on the screen is what is necessary to learn about the characters, to learn about the plot, to learn about the setting. Because the setting was also, in all 3 of these, the setting is really important. And 2 of those settings are Texas, which they capture very well. But yeah, they are very good. None of these movies are over 2 hours. All 3 of them are under 2 hours long.
I think No Country is just at 2 hours.
Is it? It might be. It might be.
I'm sure if you cut the credits and the opening titles.
Yeah. I mean, and then Shakespeare said that brevity is the soul of wit. And, they are quite witty, the Coens. And
this is probably the least humorous. They don't linger on things
that they don't need to.
But it's true.
Which one is?
This one.
Blood Simple?
Blood Simple.
Probably. But again, the other thing that's so good about them is that they'll throw the humor in right like when you aren't expecting it. Someone will say something or someone will do something or something that seems like it's going to be like really dark and scary. Like both of the home invasion scenes are kind of funny. In this one, when her husband comes to the house to kill her or whatever he was going to do, and then the way all that ends up working out is like it's emasculating for him, but it's also like it's funny to the audience because it seemed like it was going to go pretty dark. Even if it does end up like a dial-in for murder situation, like that's still, what we got was very realistic right when you didn't expect it. And then in Fargo, when the kidnappers kidnap the wife, that's also pretty funny too, even though it's a very tense, realistic scene of what that would probably look like.
Yeah, but I do want to talk about how all these things, this kind of focus on the characters and this paring down of things you don't need, lends itself to falling in the noir, or probably more accurately neo-noir category, because it definitely felt like that, almost in the most classic sense of being that very dark story that focuses on characters' conflicts with each other and what certain actions will drive them to do that have certain consequences, and it's all very consequence driven, like we've talked about with other neo-noir films like Old Boy and stuff like that.
That's a great movie, Old Boy.
Yeah, check out our podcast on it.
Yeah, I will.
If only somebody had done that.
Hey, you know what's really bad though is Josh Brolin's remake of Old Boy. Stay far away from that.
I feel like for me, the thing that really pushes it over the edge into the noir territory is Emmett Walsh's character, the slippery private eye, who kind of just really, really wraps it up.
I hated him so much.
He's great though. He does such a good job.
He does a good job of making you hate him.
He's hateable. He's delightfully hateable.
But that's his role, and he is that slippery, slimy character who really brings it full circle for me to not just a crime thriller, but a noir thriller, because it feels like it has that element that was quintessentially noir when you had something that was either like something illicit in the mix other than murder, like gangs or drugs or private eyes. And that's exactly what he kind of brings to the table.
Yeah, and that actually is an interesting element, because you don't think about modern stories having, private detectives, private eyes, but that's a very noir, like she walked into my office, and, private eyes are such a noir trope that throwing that in here is definitely one of those elements that lends it to that genre, or even just that element alone almost makes it a noir by default.
Yeah, just neo-noir because it has color.
And that's the other thing.
Such a banal description, but it's such a good way to divide the two.
But that's the other way that the other element that we talked about with Old Boy was how much color lends to neo-noir. And this film has those neon lights from the bar, and it has very specific uses of color.
It's so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's extremely well shot.
Yeah. And I know all that talk of precise planning can seem a little utilitarian, but man, does it lead to some beautiful shots. The use of the neon in the bar is incredible, and I think my favorite shot in this entire film is of I guess they're feet, kind of. I mean, it's boots. It's when there's a point where Ray is walking up to a door in the bar, and we see this light coming out from underneath the door, and the dust kicks up just perfectly around his boots. And it is just a gorgeous shot. I just really, really, really love the texture that kicks into the air.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the noir aspects are that all the characters have, everyone has a little bit of dirt on them. Everyone's got their hands dirty a little bit, with the exception of, what's his name? Lewis? Who's the other bartender?
Oh, yeah.
Maurice.
Lewis? What's his name?
Maurice.
Yeah.
Maurice. Yes.
I forgot about him.
He's great. Yeah. And I said he's the fifth kind of player in this. And not that he gets entangled in it too much, but I love how they throw him in as, and if maybe he's the moral center, if there is one. But he's not involved enough to be. Well, I love how he gets thrown into the mix because he thinks that Bray stole the money.
Yeah, he has no idea what's going on.
And comes to confront him about it. And he's like, hey, man, that makes me look bad too. Like, you should probably give him the money back.
Yeah, talking about moments of levity in an otherwise serious film.
Yeah.
Like, Maurice definitely brings some of that to the table.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And just not because what he's doing is uncharacteristic or anything like that. It's because the audience knows what has been going on, and Maurice doesn't. He has such a simplified view of why he's upset.
Yes.
And there's so much more happening that we think it's funny that he's being so upset over the money when there are lives at stake in this whole mess.
Yes. And that's another interesting thing is to look at in all three of these movies is which characters are most interested in a good outcome and which characters are most interested in getting away with the money. In all three of them, there are characters just interested in, I want to get away with all this money alive. Rarely do they,
right.
But that's
Yeah, that hardly ever leads to anything good.
Yeah, one of you talked about how money is just the ultimate MacGuffin that will never get old because it's tried and true. It's honest. That is how things actually are.
Yeah. I wanted to put a label on something that is a very straightforward dramatic term that gets heard a lot in writing and theater, and we just should throw out there. And that's dramatic irony, which is a very specific type of irony that is all over the frickin' place in Coen Brothers movies. And that's when the audience knows something that the character or characters don't. And that's like the appeal of Blood Simple and probably the other two movies to a large extent, is that we are incredibly in the know as the audience watching these characters struggle to find out what they do know. And sometimes it's funny, like when we see Maurice accusing Ray of taking the money, and sometimes it's very tragic.
Yeah, it was actually a little confusing for me at some points because I wasn't understanding why Ray was doing what he was doing until I realized that he was thinking that someone knew something that they didn't. And so, yeah, it's the way you reveal information to the audience versus the characters that really builds that tension, and it's perfect in this movie.
You know what else is great? When can I talk about things that are great? Well, one thing that's really great is that you are told things about characters that gives you a certain expectation about them, but you're told that from a character whose point of view isn't necessarily reliable. Like when I think I know exactly what you're talking about. That really great piece of acting and piece of writing, that is the conversation between Ray and Marty, which I think is the only conversation they have, where he basically fires him for sleeping with his wife, and then he's like,
"Can I have my money?"
Yeah, no, but when he's like, that great line that and then someday she'll look at you and say, "What? I didn't do anything funny." And so the whole movie, you're set up to think, oh, she's a two-time, and she's bad news. Some extent. Which she is to some extent, that she cheated on her husband, but there's nothing in the movie that lends itself to the idea that like she's been planning to like screw this guy over and take the money or something. Yeah. But the whole time, part of us is thinking that because he said that. So it's and he could just be saying that because like he's upset at her for doing this to him.
Yeah, but there's the other element to that is that he was having her followed before he knew that she was cheating on him. So there is this element of mistrust that is already built up against her
inherent
that
in the marriage.
The audience is getting through word of mouth, and then there's only one real instance that we're seeing, which is that one incident at the beginning, and nothing else. Everything else is word of mouth, but it's built up so much that we just kind of instinctively hate her.
Yes, there's also a very effective dream sequence in the movie that takes the viewer by surprise. Yeah, very similar to the dream sequence in Gravity. And I very much enjoy. Do you remember the dream sequence in Gravity where George Clooney comes back to the about. And I thought that was very good and what that also did is kind of eliminate that question from your mind of like, oh, so last time we saw him, I don't really know if he's coming back. I'm not sure. But then by showing you that and then taking you out of it, it brings you into the realism of, oh, yeah, no, that guy definitely is not coming back for some reason. So it's a really good way of answering that question, but also giving you the what if that did happen, here's what it would look like. At the same time, you kind of get both sides of the thing. So
yeah, it surprised me in terms of a stylistic choice because it didn't feel like a Coen Brothers move, especially in one of these crime thrillers like Fargo and No Country, which are so grounded in reality, that it was almost like a Lynchian scene that I was not expecting. And it just kind of, then whenever it's revealed that it is a dream, I was like, oh, okay. I was totally not expecting them to go there. And that's interesting because it's like the Coens aren't even relying on a built-up sense of reality in these movies because they didn't have any expectations from their audience because this is their first movie. So it's just interesting looking back on it after seeing the movies that they've made after this.
Yeah.
But anyway, Blood Simple is defined as crazed by violence. So kind of what the way I interpret that is kind of like either like a bloodlust or some kind of like post-traumatic stress or somewhere in between those 2 points.
Yeah, it's almost like just the words blood simple is like almost any problem can be solved simply by shedding blood, which is the approach that some of these characters take, and then it ends up being not simple at all. But it's almost the same thread runs through all three of these films, and it's quite fitting that this is the first Coen Brothers movie called Blood Simple, because that's the theme that they deal with over and over again. And it becomes less and less simple each time they tackle it.
Agreed. And I feel like a part of the message inherent in all of that, but especially when we get to No Country for Old Men, is that violence doesn't solve your problems, you know?
Never.
Yeah, that never. It's rare in these movies that you will cathartically see, the good character triumph over the bad character through use of violence. It does happen. It definitely does happen. But much more often, violence is
right.
No good character kills somebody, and that killing is making it better. Yes,
that's correct. That's correct.
But let's get into Fargo.
Yes. So Fargo is a movie, is a black comedy. It's billed as a thriller whenever the Coens talk about it, but I would say it's a black comedy about another plan gone wrong. Jerry Lundegaard, played very well here by William H. Macy, hatches a plan to have his wife kidnapped so that he can collect the hostage negotiation money from his wife's father, who is well off, because he is in debt for reasons never explained. So Jerry Lundegaard owes people money, so he hires kidnappers to kidnap his wife so that he can get the percentage of the ransom money that he assumes her father will pay. Of course, the plan does not go as intended, and the police soon get involved when blood has been spilt, and everything kind of unravels from there as we see William H. Macy start to spiral into trying to salvage whatever bit of this he can, while Frances McDormand as the 7-month police chief, Marge Gunderson, tries to crack the case. She's pregnant, this police chief, and she's 7 months pregnant. And that actually leads to a lot of just interesting, humorous moments, tidbits when she'll be at a crime scene and get morning sickness. And so it's so good, so good. What do you guys think about Fargo?
I love Fargo.
Yeah, it's unique out of the three that we've watched in its setting, as we talked about before, in the fact that it's set in the North, is still very kind of heart country, a lot of good people, but the Texas setting for the other two films kind of gives all the characters a very kind of gruffness to them, even though you still have some of that country Southern hospitality element to some of the minor characters. They all have like this kind of, you have this subconscious feeling that anyone in Texas could do anything. Like there's a grittiness to them. But in Fargo, all of the extra characters who are nice are just too nice. And it puts the violence into very stark relief in this movie in a way that you really don't see in almost any other movie.
I really liked what you said about the how everyone's a little bit too nice, because that really taps into one of the most central themes in the movie, which is how small town American niceness it causes an emotional separation that conditions us not to understand one another. And there's a lot of similarly to Blood Simple, people not being on the same page, clearly just because like they're all such different people, but they're conditioned to just be polite and nice all the time. And that's in very stark contrast with the kidnappers, who are profane and selfish and and all that. And so you really see a stark good versus evil here in a very like ordinary way, though, just in how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, especially in the character of the detective, Marge, who, has that very nice quality, but she can still be incredibly intimidating in the most remarkable way, which is what won her the Oscar.
Yes.
And that she uses that like as an interrogation tactic in all of her encounters with suspects or other people related to the case she's working on. And it's so amazing to see her combine those two parts of that niceness, quote unquote.
But yes, and there's also a sort of naivety that goes into all of these police officers because they're so conditioned to the niceness thing. Like she doesn't even. It takes her a minute as a detective to even understand that someone has been lying to her. It takes, So she goes to the dealership that Jerry works at, and she's just asking him questions because the case is lettered there. She's not particularly suspicious of him, right. And he of course acts just extraordinarily suspicious the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And just feeds her just a bunch of lies that she's like, okay, whatever, that's kind of weird, but that's fine. And it's not until later that after she goes and meets with old high school pal Mikey and Akita, and maybe the funniest scene in the whole movie. And then she checks up on his story that he told her, and her friend was like, "Oh, what? No, like that girl that he said that he married and died. She's doing really fine, but like he was like bothering her and like being like really weird." And so she realizes, oh, some people just like lie about stuff sometimes, and it makes her second think it, And
but again, the contrast is so strange because she has that element, but then she also has the very experienced police detective element where she goes to the first crime scene of the two kids who were shot in their car, and she's like looking at them, and their brains are blown out and stuff like that, and she's not fazed at all. There's another comedic moment, as you said, where she gets morning sickness, and you think it's because of the gore that she's experiencing, but she's totally fine with it. Like, she's so unfazed by things that even if she doesn't expect them, she can adapt to it incredibly quickly.
That's true. This execution type deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Very, very good. Great scene, that first scene. Because, and I love how they wait until, like, the end of that first act, like a full half an hour before even bringing out Frances McDormand. They could have had her be a part of the crime, but they did. Kind of like an episode of Columbo or something where you see the whole crime before you see the detective start to work on it, and all the inside. Kind of, you were talking about dramatic irony, Alex. And this is another case of that, where you have the whole crime from its pre-production to its everything that is intended to happen and everything that ends up happening, and then she's on the case, and all of a sudden you're introduced into this whole new world, and you get into this whole new character that's very different from the world and the characters that have already been established. And that's always fun in a movie, where it feels like you're starting another little mini movie that looks like it might even be better than the movie you've been watching for the first little bit. So
and that's I will really say, cool. Can I kind of throw out this element that this movie really reminds me of, which is it has such an in cold blood kind of feel in the way we're watching the two criminals and their sometimes buffoonish antics, and then we're watching the detectives, but also there's the way that the criminals interact with each other and other people, and how just blatant and remorseless they are when they're committing these crimes, and the way that an innocent, for lack of a better word, family gets mixed up into all of this, and all these people who just are so not used to suspecting people or being suspicious of people all get thrown into this mix. And I wouldn't be surprised if In Cold Blood had a big influence on this movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. Alex, what are you thinking?
Oh, sorry. I went off on a little side tangent in my own head.
No, that's good. I'm wondering what that is.
But it was about the Fargo TV show.
See, that's what I've been thinking about too, because that show is so good. And if I can just sidebar for one sec, what the Fargo TV show does so well that I've never really seen before is it's able to take like the soul out of the movie and sort of give you the same feel and the same tone without just like remaking the same movie. And I think a part of the way they were able to do that is because they had this family of Coen Brother movies to take out like that ideology, that worldview of all three of these movies and some of their others. All of that is in the Fargo TV show. It's kind of like a Coen Brothers dark crime thriller TV show.
Are they producers on the show?
They are,
okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
And Noah Hawley, who's the creator of it, just does such a good job. The first two seasons are great. The second is probably even better than the first one. And then the third one kind of tripped a little bit, but it's still good. It's at some point it starts to feel very familiar. All this stuff, and it a little bit starts to get tiresome because it's in the same place with the same type of characters, so that gets a little bit old. But still, I would highly recommend the TV show Fargo, especially if you liked these three movies, because they take a lot of inspiration from No Country for Old Men, from Blood Simple, from even Big Lebowski, and some of their other movies.
So as far as the show and capturing the essence, does part of that come from the dialogue? Were they able to capture the Coen Brothers dialogue? Because that is something we haven't touched on yet, but it is a huge trademark of the Coen Brothers' work, is the way that they're able to craft dialogue and the way that characters feed off of each other and stuff like that.
Oh, you betcha.
Yeah, don't you know?
Yeah, they do a real good job with it.
The dialogue is so good, and it's so to the point that the whole scene is. Maybe it's just the silly accents, but any scene where a detective is interrogating somebody else is just so funny. Like when Marge is talking to the two like hookers or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
The way it humanizes those two characters, they're just like regular girls, like whatever. It's hilarious.
And the way
go Bears.
What it reveals about Frances McDormand's character, too, as far as her really, again, not being fazed by anything or anybody, any person.
She's non-judgmental as well.
Yeah, she can just, strike up conversation with anybody, and then she prods around where she thinks people are lying. When she catches on to that in the most just like the epitomal passive aggressive kind of moves that I've ever seen, where she's just like, so if you're telling me this, but I've discovered this, then that would be quite of a coincidence, don't you think?
Yes. Very, very good. And in fact, the only time I feel like she really passes judgment in a very direct way is one of the last scenes in the movie in the police cruiser when the guy's in the back seat, and we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. But really, really good scene that I like a lot.
Yeah, and another part of what makes the dialogue work so darn well is talked about in this Every Frame of Painting video, and if you want to get into it in depth, you should check out that video. We'll post a link to it on this blog post. But the gist of it is that the way the Coen Brothers cut their dialogue, and keep in mind that they do both personally cut all of their films, leaves space for not just the dialogue itself, but for the physical acting of the characters to happen in both shots. And there's a lot of other talk in the video about how they use wide lenses, which helps emphasize the location, the situation, and the movement of the characters, which is all very important. But I do like, when we're talking about dialogue specifically, to focus in on the fact that a dialogue scene between two actors is not just the words that are spoken, but the reactions to them. And there are some really beautiful reactions that happen in Fargo, and a lot of those reactions are what get laughs, such as Marge's never-ending smile and her kind of like awkward head tilts at like things people say, especially Jerry Lundegaard's squirming
in the second
his interviews with her. Yeah, where he's just acting so suspicious. Like, do you want to get caught? If so,
Right, exactly.
act like this.
But again, that goes
And he
into
does so good.
Yeah, and it goes into this other theme we've been looking at, which is, otherwise good people maybe making one decision that's not the smartest, and then from there it spirals out of control and consequences add up. Again, in a kind of noir way, although this one is definitely more comedic and takes it out of that very specifically noir tone.
Yeah, and I think they realized they had a gold mine when they were working with these accents. And I think they knew they would have that going into it because they grew up there. To put those on screen. And I'm very curious to. I don't think the Coen brothers have these accents. Because they grew up in the Twin Cities area itself. But I know a lot of the actors, a lot of the bit players, like the two girls from the two escorts, actually had those accents. And there's a good article where Roger Deakins is talking about how I thought they were just putting it on for the camera, but they
actually had those accents, and I didn't think those actually existed. And we don't see it as much in Blood Simple, partially because that was their first movie, their first commercial film that they ever made, and they had a very tight budget. And Fargo did have a fairly small budget too. It had like a $6 million budget, but they really take advantage of that location in Fargo. And it first of all, visually, because there are some beautiful shots with snow.
Right.
Although apparently the winter when they shot the film was the lightest snow that had ever there had been in Minnesota for like the past decade or something like that. So they used a snow machine for a lot of the film. Wow. But the location also kind of becomes a character in Fargo, and you feel it in, I think, to some extent in No Country for Old Men, where the land and the place where these characters interact becomes part of the story to such an extent that it characterizes the plot and the characters and the interactions and how you view the film. And it's something that you talk about a lot in a show like True Detective. I know a lot of people mentioned it in the first season of True Detective, like, oh, the location's a character. But definitely in Coen Brothers films, the location is a character, and you feel that in a big way in Fargo.
And
it's the titular character
in No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, you're right. It is the titular character.
So you bring life to your setting in a variety of ways. First of all, again, we have a contrast of kind of in a more thematic, metaphorical way of the darkness of the things that are happening and the just pure whiteness of the surroundings. And then you could put that into contrast with, again, in that first crime scene shot, you have Frances McDormand with just the sea of white behind her and one red speck, which is one of the bodies. But also things like the gigantic Paul Bunyan statue and the fact that the being the home of Paul Bunyan and the Blue Ox as one of the bars or whatever is just constantly brought up, and that kind of gives this life and this realness to it, because again, it's something so trivial, like who Paul Bunyan? Oh yeah, Paul Bunyan. But they're so like hung up on it because there's nothing else to be hung up on over there.
I want to say they definitely built that statue for the film. And I want to say they left it up, and it stood there for like a few years after the film before someone took it down.
That's funny.
Oh, why would they take it down?
I don't know. Maybe it got wrecked in a storm or something. They were like, we should get rid of this.
All right.
Anything else for Fargo?
I mean, actually, yes. There's so much to talk about, and I just haven't said it yet. Like, I just feel like there's so much everywhere, even in the scenes that don't like. Remember I was saying that Blood Simple is like really tight. Fargo has a good amount of scenes that are just like, you don't necessarily need them, but they really, really get you into the character's headspace. Like Jerry Lundegaard trying to ice off his windows in the parking lot. in the isolated parking lot.
Or just even any of the scenes with Jerry and his family or his father-in-law, because sometimes they feel so trite, I guess, and trivial, but they really add to this kind of element of his home life. You get more into his background and how normal he is, and then seeing the kind of huge, I don't even know, like accidentally falling into something so dark when everything else in his life is so normal. It's, again, this movie is so much about contrasts and throwing certain elements into relief.
Yes.
But with all that, let us get into our last film most recently, No Country for Old Men. Alex, what do we got here?
Yeah, so we all grew up in Texas. And do you guys remember that time when we were out hunting some antelope or gazelle or deer? Probably deer, because deer are in North America, not antelope or gazelle. And we stumbled across a drug deal gone wrong and ran off with millions of dollars in cash and had a psychopathic bounty hunter out after us. Or not a bounty hunter. He was just like a hitman out after us who wore way too much pale makeup.
I remember that. That was good times.
Yeah. It also reminds me of the time that all three of us were Josh Brolin all at once.
Yes.
And so that is the plot of No Country for Old Men.
Really captured life in West Texas. It's really interesting. That's how it is.
Yeah. And it's set in either the 60s or the 70s. And that's kind of key to the themes of the film. And a hunter, like I said, stumbles across a drug bust or a drug deal gone terribly wrong. Everybody's dead. And he makes off with the money and quickly finds himself drawn into a hunt for the money, which he doesn't know at the time has a tracker in it. And that's not a spoiler. You know that within like the first 20 minutes of the film. But he is being chased by the Mexican drug cartel on one hand, who wants the money, and by a completely terrifying, one of the best movie villains I've ever seen, Anton Chigurh, who is scary. He's a killer. He has some weird code of honor, but it's definitely at least sociopathic, if not psychopathic.
He hates MI6 for some reason.
Oh gosh. Wrong movie.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, different week.
But yeah,
well, so I think the philosophy of his worldview, especially about himself, is a very interesting thing that we can go into. But sorry, go ahead with your.
Yeah, no worries. And we do have a parallel, kind of involved, kind of just observational, kind of just a narrator. Well, actually, explicitly a narrator in some parts.
Yeah.
Storyline that follows Lee Harvey, or not Lee Harvey Oswald. That is so terribly wrong.
Wow. Talk about wrong movie.
That follows Tommy Lee Jones as Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, who is an older sheriff who is questioning what the world has come to, and a lot of the themes in the movie kind of have to do with this shifting, I don't know what's the right word, zeitgeist feel of the country, as you have that big mid 20th century transition, the big cultural shift that happened, as well as all of the kind of bad stuff that came along with it, like the drugs coming into the country that they definitely complain about. They also complain about punk rock and other things that old people like to complain about over the course of the film. But a lot of it is Tommy Lee Jones's observations and struggles with the changing world around him. And as he explains in his opening narration, this is No Country for Old Men, which actually comes from a very nice poem about Byzantium, which is my current rebound historical empire that I'm really into. So go check out the History of Byzantium podcast. Quick plug of the week. Continue. No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, that was a really, really great introduction to this movie, especially when you were harping on the themes there. Yeah, but...
yeah, it is a very thematic and atmospheric movie at some points, even though it does have kind of action-y moments in there too, yes. Which is a weird but really well delivered mix.
It certainly is a good delivery because it keeps you gripped to the edge of your seat whether or not you're interested in the themes of the film. And I can say, having watched it 2 times in the past 3 weeks, the themes make a whole lot more sense the second time around. And maybe that's just because I'm not as smart as I'd like to be, but
it just demands a rewatch because it's a good piece of art, you know?
Yeah.
You know, there's always the question, what is a movie about? And, you know, what is the movie about? And thematically and synopsisly, those are very different questions.
Yeah.
And you did a really good job of addressing both of them, Alex. But it's interesting how even though we're introduced with his narration, the story really is thematically about Tommy Lee Jones's character. He, like Marge and like we were talking about earlier, is definitely the moral center of the movie. The difference being that the resolution for his character, if you can call it that, is very different from Marge's and moral centers generally. But I think that's what makes it so much more powerful when you get to the end of the film. But even throughout the entire movie, just with his character, what we really get is so this is a neo-Western or a modern Western, which is a little bit different than what your typical Western, because there's no sense of a nostalgia or a harkening back to something. It's like it's about the present day, present times, present themes.
Yeah.
Another really good example of a modern Western that I'd recommend is last year's movie Hell or High Water, which I thought was really, really great and captured a lot of the same themes. But on No Country, yeah, and because it's able to bring out the themes of modern culture, what you have a lot of is the same kinds of anxieties that people were feeling and thinking about in, I guess, 2006, 2007 when it came out, are really clearly displayed in terms of how the movie makes you feel, especially by the end of it. There's some hints of nihilism there, but if you go deeper, there's a lot more. I feel like it's a very good. It's really good at capturing the post 9/11 worldview that shifted so violently at the beginning of the century. In its title, No Country for Old Men, which means a lot of things, and not just to the sheriff, but you get this sense that the way things used to be, and he talks about this in his opening narration when he says that, you know, he caught some kid who killed some girl, and the kid told him, yes, I did this, I loved doing it, and if you set me free, I'll go do it again. And that changing view of it used to be that we could at least understand the point of view we were opposing, because criminals would want something material. They wanted money. They wanted status. They wanted whatever it was. But nowadays you have this evil that comes from a place of something you can't quite understand, something that is
it's based on impulses. It's not based on any kind of desire for something specific.
Well, it's based on impulses, but it's also based on a very deeply rooted belief and extremism that you see in Anton. And the change that occurs. So, for instance, when we fought World War II, it was because Hitler wanted things to be a certain way so that he could have his whatever. You could at least understand, okay, got it. We got to make sure he doesn't get the things he wants because whatever. But now there's this extremism, and specifically in what you see in the War on Terror post 9/11, where it's just like the solution clearly isn't we go over there and kill all of them because we can. And that's the pervasiveness of that worldview, of that kind of evil that we're seeing now, that its intent is solely to do hurt to other people. That is what they want to do. They just because that's the fulfillment of their worldview, which isn't exactly what you see with Anton. But the similarities are that by the end of the movie, what Ed Tom realizes is that the best way to save the rest of society is to, instead of attempting to combat the evil in the same way it's combating others, is to separate yourself from it and be able to, by doing that, remain a person who is able to not be corrupted by it. Because what he says is...
Tommy Lee Jones' character?
I am, yes. Okay. But yeah, that's just a couple of things thematically that I think are very powerful about the movie. And any movie that
makes
really,
total sense.
Yeah, that can really get deep into the mindset of a certain culture is just really, really good. It's just and it's something that people don't even try to do very often. But when it's done effectively, it wins Best Picture. So
yeah, and all of the characters throughout this film are struggling to try to understand Anton Chigurh, and none of them really can. And our boy Lee Harvey Oswald, Tommy Lee Jones, says he's just a ghost, but he's dangerous, and he leaves bodies in his trail, and he's this ethereal threat that is hard to pin down and understand. But it's still there, and it's still scary.
The other interesting element, I think, to Anton's character is the element of chance that is kind of wrapped up in his motivations to some extent, but also just kind of follows him around because he has the coin where he will sometimes give people a chance by flipping a coin and having them call it. And so in some way, like, kind of determining their fate, yet he is the agent of that, and yet really no one is, because it's literally a coin toss. And actually, I was thinking about it, and I got the opening narration to this film and Blood Simple confused, because at the beginning of Blood Simple, there is another opening narration about planners and about how you can't plan too strictly because there's always another element that will come in and change it, which we're seeing in all of these, but is thematically expounded upon in this film. And even what happens to Anton at the end of the movie is an act of chance that even he didn't see coming, as sort of the agent of chance and unpredictability. So there's a lot of that going into it. And and then what, I guess, the different characters' reaction to it is. So you have Llewellyn, played by Josh Brolin, who it kind of takes the approach of trying to tackle chance or fate or whatever and go at it head on. And it doesn't necessarily, like, seeing the results from that versus Tommy Lee Jones, who throughout the film is constantly, as you said, distancing himself from kind of taking any, overt action to get close to this this chaotic element that's happening that is dangerous, where anytime he's asked to go to one of the crime scenes that's left behind or any like that, he's like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to stay here. And then at the end, how he ends up coping. So seeing Josh Brolin versus Tommy Lee Jones's characters, their reactions and how they end up is all wrapped into this element of chaos. And watching this film again, I kind of was pitting Anton against the Joker, honestly, and seeing where their ideologies are different, because it's a similar kind of, they have no regard for the law, and yet the Joker is more actively chaotic, whereas Anton only does things if they come into his path. He doesn't seek out ways to disrupt people's lives. He just has a goal, get the briefcase. Anyone who stands in the way, he's going to either kill outright or he's going to flip his coin again and add that chance element.
Well, the coin flip is reserved for people who he doesn't actually have to kill.
Okay.
But would like to or feel like he is supposed to. It seems like the gas station attendant.
Yeah. There are also people who never say you don't have to kill me, which I find interesting because he does say that like everybody says you don't have to kill me.
But then there was the secretary lady. Did he kill her?
He did not.
No.
Okay.
No, he did not.
I think the reason he didn't kill her was because he respected that she had a code that she stuck to. Like, we can't give you that information. And he asks her 3 times, where does he work? He says, I'm looking for the Llewellyn Moss. And she says, did you go up to his trailer? Yeah. Well, then I'd say he's probably at work. Do you want to leave a message? And he said, where does he work? And she was like, oh, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to give out that information. And he asked it friendly first time. And the second time he asked it more like threatening, like, where does he work? And she's like, sir, like, I can't tell you that. And, he hears like a toilet flush or something that tells him there's other people there. And there's just kind of like a stare down for a second. And he gets the sense from her, like, I'm not going to back down from this either. Of course, she doesn't think he's thinking about killing her. But I think part of that is that he has a respect for people who don't BS, who don't small talk, who do what they're there to do and stick to their principles. And he didn't need to kill her. So,
but then you have the wife at the end, and we'll talk about that in overall. But I think that's an interesting comparison.
It is, yes. He didn't flip the coin on that secretary.
I know.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as long as we're on the secretary, that's a little bit of a comedic moment just in her character and how kind of blasé she is, and again, not knowing the full extent of what's going on around her just by having Anton's presence in front of her. But again, bringing that humor in, and I think this is probably maybe the least humorous of the 3.
Oh, definitely.
But we still have those comedic relief moments.
Yeah.
And I do want to put out there that the Coen brothers have made like films that are almost completely dedicated comedies, so they are very good at both of these, and we're just looking at these very dark crime thriller movies, and I think that they definitely deserve another episode about their more lighthearted films. So when we're talking
this is
about
the dark side of the Coens.
Yeah, so when we're talking about these mix of tones, like these aren't the Coen brothers just trying to infuse something that's separate from the theme that they only deal with. They've been able to tackle pretty much every kind of tone and film and pull it off really well. We're sticking to one, but as we talk about these, just know that they are really good at doing comedy in its own right.
Yes, they are.
They do like to genre hop.
And genre mix.
Well, yeah, this is very much a genre hybrid. It's a Western. It's interesting. It's kind of a horror movie a little bit, if you think about Chigurh's character.
Yeah. Anytime there's a close-up on his face, I think it's a horror movie.
Yeah, that haircut, man.
And that's like a compliment to the makeup artist right there. Like, they
do a good job of,
because he's a good-looking man, Javier Bardem.
Terrifying.
And yes. What do you want to talk about, Jonathan?
I was just going to say, I wanted to compare one moment in No Country for Old Men to the dream sequence in Blood Simple. If you guys know what I'm talking about, where the only time Tommy Lee Jones goes to one of the crime scenes is pretty much after everything is wrapped up, and he goes to the hotel room where the climax has happened, which is not actually seen by the audience, in an interesting move where we basically take our focus from the film from Josh Brolin and shift it onto Tommy Lee Jones, who has been a minor character from the beginning of the movie. But he walks up to the door and sees the empty lock socket, for lack of a better word, and he thinks he sees Chigurh in the room in the reflection. But
is that what's happening? That is still
think so. I think it's his
ambiguity
fear.
Note.
I thought they were just cutting across time.
Yeah, but then he goes in and sits down.
You think we cut across time? Oh, that's interesting.
I kind of read it as it's his imagination. It's his fear. It's this whole time he's been avoiding this this thing, this chaos, and then he goes and he's starting to imagine that he's about to run into it face to face, and he still doesn't. And then that's when he realizes that he can't put up with it because of what he feels, and then realizes that it's not actually there.
Well, whether or not it was cutting between a real moment where Shigeru was there or if it was completely imagined, the same effect is achieved.
Right.
Yes. Is there any possibility that he was in the room?
I think he was in the room at some point. Doubt it.
Well, sure. But like at that is there a possibility that Shigeru
was what I was thinking. He opens the door
and saw him and chose not to kill him for some reason.
He opens the door and it swings all the way. I feel like
Yeah,
he checks the whole room.
Yeah, and then he checks the whole room. I think there's very little possibility, but it's a moment that builds dread. You know, whatever
and
actually
it also
happened.
robs you of the showdown that we
the climax, like I said.
Get. Yes, yeah.
Although I guess let's go ahead here.
It becomes a much more ideological thing.
Let's go ahead here and shift into overall notes and give our little spoiler alert, so we could talk about the end of this film and the end of all of these films, because we're really skirting the edge here. So if we have adequately interested you in any of these films, stop the podcast now and go watch them. No Country for Old Men is on Netflix. And then come back and listen to us spoil the crap out of them, because there's so much to spoil. So I know Ben has lots to say. I don't know if you want to kick that off.
Okay, sure, I will. So the end of this movie, I pride myself on liking the end of this movie, mostly because most people don't like the end of this movie. It's similar to the end of my favorite piece of media of all time, which is The Sopranos. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Hopefully some of your audience is.
I'm familiar with the end.
Yeah, so then you can see how they are similar. And interestingly enough, the same year that this won Best Picture, the final season of Sopranos won Best Dramatic Series. So, and I don't know if that also has something to do with the pervasive feeling of that year. I don't know. But, the end of this movie is a jarring cut to black. And if there's one thing I love, it's a jarring cut to black. And it doesn't even come, and it comes in the middle of a conversation that the sheriff has, or is having with his wife, recently retired sheriff.
Right, our Tommy Lee Jones character.
Yes, after going to the crime scene, finding it empty, he goes and talks to, I think, an uncle of his.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was his old partner or if that was... I assumed it was someone in his family, though.
I think that it was Anakin Skywalker's stepdad with the...
Yeah.
I think it was actually that person. I think he went to Tatooine.
It's possible. Lots of sand. No, but that conversation was interesting. I don't know what you're about to say about it, but just one quick thought I had about it is that contrasting that conversation with the opening... narration voiceover, because in the conversation he's talking about how his uncle and his dad, like the way that they died in the line of action as far as being sheriffs and being police officers, compared to the opening voiceover where he's talking about how great it must have been to be one of the old sheriffs in the older times, and how they didn't even carry guns and stuff. And yet then you see how they all ended up dying in the same line of action. And it, it's like, it's No Country for Old Men, because if you can make it that long, like you can't have these assumptions that people are so good that you don't have to carry a gun, because that gets you killed. Yeah. Which goes back into our themes from Fargo. So it's the same kind of angle that it's the same kind of material that the Coen brothers are tackling. They just put it in a new location and put a different angle on the same themes. Yeah, and so both of these movies, with Fargo and No Country, the very last scene is a conversation between the moral center, good character, and that character's spouse. It's them together, reunited, happily ever after, more or less. Right. And both of these characters get their, both Marge Gunderson and Sheriff Bell get
are really able to deliver their side of this whole moral smorgasbord. To continue with No Country before I go to Fargo, though. So, he tells his wife about these two dreams that he had, and I'm trying to remember the specifics of both dreams. But I touched on this earlier when just talking about the worldview of it. But yeah. The first one was about carrying a fire, and the second one was his dad talking to him, and what he realizes in these dreams that he had, that the best. Yeah, again, I think the best way for him to feel like he will be able to be the kind of person that his father would be proud of, or be the kind of person that would be worthy of seeing his father again in the afterlife of whatever he dreamed it to be, is to, as he said in the opening monologue, voiceover, I'd have to put myself in danger of playing in a man would have to put his soul at hazard to go to a place that he didn't understand. And I think by the end of the movie, at least ethically, he is able to come full circle and do the right thing, which in this scenario means that he can't achieve justice in his line of work. And that's who that really hurts most is the viewer, who at this whole time has been expecting this kind of cathartic justice resolution to the story that you really don't get. And I think it's because they view sugar as this force of nature, as this picture of evil that is something you can never truly conquer. It's not like, especially for cops, they must feel this way. When you catch a criminal, there's still a bunch more out there. There's still going to be a murder tomorrow morning, what have you. So by painting Chigurh as this force of nature, or whatever you want to call it, by just making him what he views himself to be, but also, like you said, the car crash.
I was going to say, I think that's this vulnerability. Part. Yeah, it's this that there's no human character or agent that slows down Chigurh. Like, I think he gets shot once in one of the shootouts.
He gets shot, and it's because remember, they're both cleaning their wounds after the gunfight.
But he doesn't stop, and I guess he doesn't after the car chase either. But it's still like one of the only elements is this element of chance that kind of gets the upper hand of him, and it's like the most shocking thing ever because this car just comes out of nowhere and slams into his car. And then Brian D from VGHS comes and finds him. But
okay, that was that.
That's who that is.
Yeah, one of those kids was. Anyway,
he's the one who gives him a shirt.
Yeah, it is.
Well, and also his thinking that like people are so. He's like, I'll trade you this money for your shirt, and the kid's like, I'll give you my shirt.
Yeah,
which is another piece of that misunderstanding that comes from between good and evil, oftentimes, and especially at the end of Fargo. But
yeah, and I guess it is interesting that money again becomes this MacGuffin, and it is one of the interestingly. And again, if you want to contrast it with the Joker, money is actually a driving force for Chigurh, and it actually has some weight, whereas the Joker, money is nothing. And he literally, where he literally burns the whole pile of it. But
I don't think Anton cares about the money.
But he uses it.
I think he wants to get it as a point of pride.
Yeah.
He does use it. That's true.
And he wants the
but I don't
briefcase.
Think his motivation is I want stuff, and the stuff that money can get me. Or at least we never see that. We never hear a thing that he wants to do. We don't know anything about him.
Yeah,
really.
He's kind of just almost like a dragon in a sense where he needs to get to the money, and then all of a sudden there are these obstacles, and it's like, okay, you're making it difficult for me to get the thing that I want, regardless of why I want it.
I think
so
that
I'm going to come after you.
No, he was sent by.
Oh, I forgot about the businessman. Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's such a weird part of this movie.
So he was hired by them, and then he immediately turned around and killed the people who hired him.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he went and hired the cartel to do the same thing. And he was like very upset by that. And then he sent Woody Harrelson after him.
Well, yeah, he sent Woody Harrelson after Anton, not after the money necessarily.
No. Yeah, I know. So I think he sent Anton after the money, and then also sent the cartel after the money. Because when he shoots him, the guy, the nobody from accounting, says, he tells him he put the transponder in the briefcase so the cartel could get it. And the guy's like, well, what's wrong with that? It's pretty efficient. And he's like, you send the perfect tool. And he didn't do that. And then also he tried to kill him with Woody Harrelson. So
again, there's so much.
And that's also an interesting question, which is, did he kill that guy? Nobody from accounting.
I think he did. I think he killed him.
Do you see me? Do you think so? I wonder if he didn't. If because the "Do you see me?" Obviously, the guy does see him. But if his response to that is, "I didn't see anything," I don't know if he would, because he goes. Well, that guy is similar to the receptionist lady that Jonathan was talking about earlier, in that he doesn't do the small talk, and Anton has a real conversation with him, and he never talks down to him. And I guess "Do you see me?" might be talking down if his point is that, of course I'm going to kill you because you just watched me murder this guy.
Well, but that line, "Do you see me?" goes back to Woody Harrelson's line. That's like, you saw him and you're alive. That doesn't happen. So that's that. "Do you see me?" was basically a like sealing his fate, as far as I'm concerned, from this theme that they set up with that line from Woody Harrelson.
That would be my argument for him killing him. But I think the real question is, why didn't they just show him killing him? And I think it's because it makes it more scary, because there's that slimmest chance that he didn't kill him. And it seems so arbitrary and so random to us, but I'm sure to Shiger it makes perfect sense.
The wife is much less ambiguous, though. It is ambiguous, but much less, because he wipes his boots.
Yes.
And that was important whenever he killed Woody Harrelson, and the blood, he picked his boots up. So
you're right.
He wipes his boots off at the end, and is like making sure that nothing got on it.
Well, also,
but do you think maybe the Coens put that there in the Woody?
They maybe just didn't want to show him killing the wife. Like, that's I respect.
Yeah, and that goes into that, and again, the nobody from accounting, and the shootout with the cartel. I mean, it's all these elements of implying it makes it more scary than just showing us.
Yes. Or the guy with the truck full of chickens or something, that you just see him.
Oh, I forgot about him.
Oh, he was obviously killed. Yeah.
Anyway, there's so much in this movie. If there are a couple other things we want to touch on about the ending of Fargo, if there's anything specific that y'all have, otherwise we'll talk about the overall Coen experience.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of tying in the No Country thing to Fargo, for me, anyways. For me, one of the best scenes in Fargo is the scene, and people might disagree with me. The scene. So at the end of Fargo, in case you don't remember, but you've seen it or whatever, Marge Gunderson tracks down the two criminals. At this point, one of them has killed the other one. Steve Buscemi's dead because he talks too much, and you can't have him out there. The other one decides, kills him. The wife of William H. Macy has also died off screen.
Because she was screaming too much.
Yes. Interestingly enough, both of the selfish, relatable characters' wives are killed off screen. And so Marge finds the other kidnapper as he is disposing of Steve Buscemi in a very iconic wood chipping fashion. And she tells him to stop, freeze, police. He runs away, and she shoots him in the leg, subdues him, and the next scene is him sitting in the back of her police cruiser, and it's this really just incredible scene where it's almost like she's lecturing him, almost like a mom would lecture her kid in the back seat of a car. Yeah, and she says,
but not like frustrated, like the exasperated mom who doesn't know what else to do.
Like she's really trying to teach him a lesson, and it's really the ideological lesson of the movie. And she says she's talking about the death toll of the crimes, and she's and for what? For a little bit of money. There's more to life than a little money, you know. Don't you know that? And then there's a pause, and she says, "And here you are, and it's a beautiful day. I just don't understand it." And at first glance, it does seem to be just like, you know, the film's protagonist, the film's moral center, and she's really earnestly imparting her ideological message of the film, you know, to the villain, to the audience. But I feel like there's more to that, because it also shows that, you know, Marge and her husband Norm. Okay, so in the last scene, Marge and her husband Norm are in this state of, you know, apparent domestic bliss. You know, they're waiting for their baby, and she's all kind of forgotten the case that had previously been consuming her life, and it shows her to kind of be content with, I just don't understand. And, you know, the conversation on the cruiser as well as the final scene show that not only are the ill-intentioned characters of the film unable to understand the mentality of, like, the good characters, but the good guys also have a fundamental misunderstanding of the bad guys' motivation as well. And I feel like that commentary applies to all the characters, and it's not just doesn't just come from a viewpoint of ideologically ethical triumphalism. That I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. There's a disconnect between all the characters. Yeah.
There's a disconnect between all the characters, but you know,
depending on what mentality you come from, because all of the normal townsfolk in Fargo understand each other. They just don't understand the criminals. And in, like, No Country, kind of the criminal mindset, they kind of understand the way that each other thinks. And even Josh Brolin's character starts to kind of get that vibe of, you know, understanding a little bit of how Anton thinks and being able to actually have a little bit of that head to head, which is what makes Woody Harrelson incredulous when he's like, you saw him and you're still alive. So there is, in one sense, he did get the leg up. So as he's falling more into that mindset, he starts to understand, and Tommy Lee Jones doesn't, because he's of the other mindset. So it's these clashing ideologies in all these movies.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really love the way they wrap up Fargo like that. And I like the happy ending on Fargo, because the whole time it's going back and forth, and you really don't know where everything is gonna end up. They have that scene where Jerry gets arrested that it feels like you're just dropped into an episode of Cops when that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's another kind of comedic, weirdly comedic element.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, the other thing that makes it kind of a happy ending, which is such a small thing, but it's the 3-cent stamp, you know?
Yeah.
Where we've been hearing that Norm is a painter and he's entering this painting contest, and he painted a picture of a mallard, and she's so, like, you know, as a good spouse should be, she's like his cheerleader, like, oh, you're going to do great, it's going to be awesome. And then he gets the 3-cent stamp, and he's kind of disappointed about it because no one uses the 3-cent stamp. And she's like, well, yeah, people need the 3-cent stamp when the price goes up, and people need the little ones. And so it's kind of a little bit metaphorical, but also it's just a hopeful note. And it kind of shows you that she hasn't become, even though, again, like you were saying, even though she doesn't understand, she hasn't become pessimistic. She still has optimism for the world, regardless of all the terrible things that happen. Like, it's such a terrible crime.
Yes. And her as a person, what Tommy Lee Jones is afraid of happening to him never happens to her with this case.
Yeah.
And part of that is because they wanted money. These weren't like crazy people, and you would try to understand why they killed or a pattern to their whatever. These are the kind of criminals that Tommy Lee Jones talks about when he talks about the old days. And so her moral aptitude does not suffer from trying to figure them out.
Yeah. And I also kind of wonder about that, like, I haven't thought too much about it, but as far as the metaphorical implications of the stamp thing, like, where it's like people need the little ones once the price goes up. So it's like almost in a way talking about that change like we get in No Country for Old Men, that again, that zeitgeist change of the way that criminals think and the way that law enforcement thinks, trying to catch up with that and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the fact that kind of having those extra characters that the Coen brothers throw in, the nice ones from these little country towns, they're needed whenever criminals become smarter and stuff like that. Like, there's not an unimportant person in these movies, whether they end up dying or not.
Also, it shows you what good of a mom she's going to be, in those last two scenes with her. So that's a good hopeful note. Plus, I just love the irony of her after, like, solving, like, this huge triple homicide murder, like...
ending with a wood chipper.
Yeah, it's not him going like, wow, that's really great that, like, you did this crazy awesome thing and saved the town today. It's her having to be like, oh, that's okay. That's congratulations on getting your duck on a stamp. Like,
that's true.
It's really funny that she is not a selfish person.
Yeah, and then on another hand, her achievement seems almost more mundane because that's her job. That's what she does. Whereas his is like, this is kind of something new, something big for him. So it's almost like, that's just what she does, and it's nothing extraordinary, as opposed to even just him getting the 3-cent stamp. Yeah, that's true. So again, these movies are so thematically drenched and just like there's so much to dig into. And that's what the Coen brothers are good for. And that's what we need to talk about is like the Coen brothers as a directing team and as a movie making force, I guess. Yeah. Alex, what do you think about that? Well, I want to hear what you think about the end of all these movies, first of all.
Well, I love the ending of Blood Simple, but that feels like a pretty easy ending to love. It's beautifully shot. It is...
Well, it's simple.
There is no denouement.
Yeah, no. And then in Fargo, I love it because it's drenched in this final sense of normalcy after this whirlwind of just chaos.
After one of the most gut-wrenching climaxes, like how graphic the wood chipper scene is. I remember just like my first reaction seeing it the first time. You're just like, what is happening right now? And that moment of seeing the foot, you're like, no. What? Wait, no. And then it just ends on such a normal note that, contrast.
And that's something that that was one of the first things I ever noticed about Coen Brothers movies was when they display, quote unquote normal life, like they really display normal life. Like that, I mean, that is such a typical like North or Midwestern house. Like and the bed is not fancy and it's just so grounded and they're watching TV as they go to bed and there's nothing like there's nothing well, I mean, they're made to look this way, so I don't feel bad saying it. There's nothing exceptional about the way they look. Like they look like a couple of middle-aged people about to go to bed. That just drove home for me. Like that was my first like taste of like, oh, this is a big part of the Coen brothers aesthetic, and I always loved that ending for that fact. And then the first time I saw the end for No Country for Old Men, it kind of rhymes, was when I realized that like, oh, there are bigger themes that I should be paying attention to in this movie.
Yeah, same.
And then the second time I watched it, I was like, okay, this is definitely about kind of like this changing of a guard and what's it like to outgrow the world around you. And have that slip by you, and to have it just no longer make sense when the nostalgia in your heart seems closer than the world you actually live in. So the second time around I liked it a lot. The first time around was definitely like there's more to this moment.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
overall, you wouldn't
have
to think. And the thing about robbing you of the climax for No Country for Old Men, I feel like, is that it makes you think. because in order to feel satisfied with that movie, you have to be like, okay, well, because like if
you have to think about it,
all of those same things happen, but also there's a scene where Tommy Lee Jones like arrests Anton or shoots him in the head or whatever, then I wouldn't be forced to think about all of this because I could feel okay about all of it. I'd be like, okay, I'm sure there's something deep there, but like, whatever, they got the bad guy. So
and I think,
I don't feel uncomfortable with it.
Going back to what we were talking about before about American remakes of foreign films, like I feel like that's what happens is you get explicitly shown the things that were implied for thematic reasons in foreign films like Old Boy. You can't do that because that misses the point of why the movie was made in the first place. And the Coen brothers know that, you know, to have a movie be anything more than just popcorn entertainment, which are fine in certain instances, but you have to do things that make the audience, like, you have to make them unsatisfied with it. You have to make them think about it. Why did they do that? You know, what does that mean? Because the Coen brothers aren't sloppy filmmakers. Everything they do is so purposeful and intentional that you can't walk away and be like, oh, well, that was a stupid choice. It's like, no, that was an intentional choice. What did it mean for the rest of the movie? And then that's how you get your audience to draw out the deeper things that you're putting in there and not just walk away and be like showing their friends like, oh, this is so cool. Look at all these gunfight scenes and stuff. It's like, no, I doubt that anyone is going to show someone No Country for Old Men because of how exciting it was. No, it's like, it makes you think so hard about it. Just, you can't help yourself.
Yeah, and I would even say that the maybe unsatisfied isn't the right word. I would say challenge the audience. Yeah. Because that's the goal of any kind of art, just in general, is to kind of challenge the audience to think or to feel, or hopefully both, and just kind of like consider something that they weren't considering before they looked at that piece of art.
And even the Coen brothers' weird movies, because like I said, they've done so many different kinds of movies, but they're always about something and they know what they're doing with their craft. So even the strange ones or the fun ones, you know, there are things that you could pull out of them, and they're just like specific ones like No Country for Old Men that really don't let you get away without thinking about them.
Yes.
And I assume that we will continue to see this work from them. They are not done yet. They are, as we've been talking about with their dialogue and stuff, they are writers. And the next film with their names on it is called Suburbicon, I think, which trailers have started dropping recently. That will actually be directed by George Clooney, who has starred in many of their films. None of the ones that we covered today, however. But it is written by them, and you can definitely get a Coen Brothers vibe from the trailer. So we'll see how that turns out. And then I think you guys were telling me that they actually have a show that they're working on also.
Yeah, the Ballad of Buster Scruggs on HBO, and it is going to be a Western anthology series, which sounds very interesting. From the team that made both True Grit and No Country for Old Men. So next week on the Filmlings, we are going to be talking about the films of Kenneth Branagh, but more specifically, the Shakespeare films of Kenneth Branagh. And what films would that be, Jonathan?
Yeah, so we are going to talk about Kenneth Branagh's directorial debut, Henry V, from 1989, and then his version of Much Ado About Nothing from 1993, with his wife at the time, Emma Roberts, and also Keanu Reeves and Michael Keaton and Denzel Washington, and just really a great cast. And then
more Michael Keaton on the Filmlings.
I know, more Michael Keaton. And then we'll wrap up with Kenneth Branagh's Shakespeare epic, which is the uncut version of Hamlet, where he does not alter Shakespeare's script, and it runs about 4 hours and 2 minutes, I believe. That's from 1996. So that will probably end up being our longest film that we've talked about on the podcast, and it'll be a hard one to beat.
Oh my. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show, Ben. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. Long-time listener, first-time caster. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, see you guys later.
So, Jonathan, how old were we when the first time we watched Henry V?
Probably, like 4th grade, like 11 or 12, and we totally did not know what was going on.
No, but we watched that whole movie.
We did, and it was great, and it was gibberish to me.
Yeah, it stands in testament to it that it's good enough that even though we didn't understand anything anybody was saying, we watched the whole movie. We never turned it off.
That's true.